Bem-vindo ao Maestria da Mente podcast, onde abordamos o que há de melhor na neurociência e no comportamento humano. Actually, firstly, I'd like to thank you not only for being here as my guest on this podcast, but because you helped me a lot during my research about hypnosis and acting. Your articles, your papers helped me a lot during this research. And as a guest for my podcast today, I'll make a little introduction about you now and correct me if I'm wrong.
Fair enough. Okay.
I know that you're not the psychiatrist in the Johnny Depp's trial.
Definitely not. That was not me.
So Dr. David Spiegel is the Wilson Professor and Associate Chair of Psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine and directs the Stanford Center on Stress and Health, and is one of the most respected experts in the clinical use of hypnosis. I'm sure about this. And the first question, Dr. Spiegel, is how did you get into the world of hypnosis?
Well, Taego, it was actually sort of a genetic illness in my family. My father was a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst who, when he went off to serve in World War II, a Viennese psychiatrist who escaped from the Nazis and came to the US, named Gustav von Aschaffenburg, had learned hypnosis because he had a smallpox scar right in the middle of his forehead. And he was doing forensic hypnosis, and he noticed that the prisoners who were looking at him would suddenly kind of lean their heads forward and close their eyes, and they seemed to go into some kind of altered state. So he got interested in hypnosis, and he offered to teach young army doctors going into combat how to use hypnosis. So my father learned it from him and used it. He was in combat in North Africa, helping people with pain and with acute stress reactions. And when he came back, he went back to his analytic training, but he remained interested in hypnosis. So he was doing it throughout his career, and the dinner table conversations were interesting. And I got occasionally to watch him make a movie about a patient or something like that. So when I got to medical school, I saw there was a hypnosis course, and I thought, well, I'll try that. And the first time I ever used it, I was on pediatrics, Children's Hospital at Harvard, and I heard this girl in status asthmaticus wheezing. The nurse said, "That's your next patient." And I followed the sound of the wheezing down the hall. And there she is, bolt upright in bed, knuckles white, struggling for breath. Her mother's crying. And I didn't know what else to do. They tried medication, subcutaneous epinephrine didn't work. So I said, "Do you want to learn a breathing exercise?" And she nodded. And I said, "Well, okay." And I got her hypnotized. And then I realized we had not covered asthma in the course yet. So I came up with a very clever statement. I said, "Each breath you take will be a little deeper and a little easier." And within 5 minutes, she wasn't wheezing anymore. She's lying back in bed. Her knuckles aren't white. Her mother stopped crying. The nurse ran out of the room, and my intern came to looking for me. And I thought he was going to pat me on the back and say, "Nice job, Spiegel." And instead, he said, "The nurse filed a complaint that you violated a Massachusetts law by hypnotizing a minor without parental consent." Now, Massachusetts has a lot of weird laws. That's not on the list. And her mother was standing next to me the whole time I did it. So, he said, "Well, you've got to stop doing this." And I said, "Oh, really? Why?" He said, "Well, it's dangerous." And I said, "Well, you were about to give her general anesthesia and start her on steroids, and you think my talking to her is dangerous." And I said, "Take me off the case if you want, but I'm not going to tell a patient of mine something I know isn't true." So over the weekend, the attending and the chief resident and my intern were arguing back and forth. And they came back on Monday with a novel idea. They said, "Let's ask the patient." That had never been done before. And she said, "Oh, I like this." Now, she'd been hospitalized every month for 3 months in status asthmaticus. She did have one subsequent hospitalization, but went on to study to be a respiratory therapist. And I thought that anything that could help a patient that much, that fast, that safely, and violate a non-existent Massachusetts law had to be worth looking into. So that got me, it was sort of right evident to me that there are things you can do with hypnosis that are fast, effective, and safe that are sometimes better than, and I use medication, I'm a physician, I use it all the time, but that are sometimes better than other approaches that we use. And so I just kept studying it and doing research on it and treating people clinically. And here I am.
I know there are many definitions about hypnosis. For you, Dr. David, what is hypnosis?
Hypnosis is a state of highly focused attention. It's like that experience you have getting so caught up in a good movie that you forget you're watching the movie, you enter the imagined world. It's like looking through the telephoto lens of a camera. What you see with great detail, but you're less aware of the context. So it's intensely focused attention. And in order to do that, you have to do two other things. You have to dissociate or put outside of conscious awareness things that would ordinarily be in consciousness that might distract you. And you have to have an openness to new ideas. It's been given the bad name of suggestibility, but what it means is you're willing just to try different premises. You're less likely to critically judge and evaluate the way in a movie. You may get caught up in a movie and the next day you may think, well, the acting wasn't that good and the plot didn't make sense and all that, but at the time you were in it. So in order to take on new ideas, to engage with things in a novel way, you have to suspend critical judgment. And that's what people do in hypnosis as well. And what we've learned using functional neuroimaging now is that one of the things that happens in the brain when you go into hypnosis is that you turn down activity in the salience network. It's a part of the brain, the anterior cingulate cortex right in the front middle of the brain, that normally keeps you alert to danger, loud noise, suspicion about something or someone. If you turn down activity in that region, you're more open to just getting absorbed in what you're concentrating on. And that's what happens in hypnosis.
Perfect. And here in Brazil, there's a popular theory about the mind and hypnosis and how hypnosis works. And this theory says that we have a conscious mind and a subconscious and unconscious mind. And that hypnosis is a way to bypass the conscious mind and suggest your subconscious mind. And that's in this theory, that's why the hypnosis works and could reprogram the mind. In my opinion, it's a simplistic and unrealistic theory of what hypnosis actually is. So, what do you think about this theory? What's your opinion about that?
Well, I share your skepticism about it. That is, our brain processes so much information all the time that it is the case that the vast majority of what we know and think and process is not part of our current conscious awareness. We do tremendous amount of parallel processing all the time. So, for example, I can type on my laptop without ever remembering how I learned how to type. So the episodic memories of how you are riding a bicycle, it's the same thing. You may not remember who taught you and what they taught you. Now you can call that unconscious processing if you want, but it's not, the idea of the unconscious, which is Freud's idea. Sure, we are influenced by memories and facts and concerns that we're not consciously aware of. That's definitely true. The idea that hypnosis is sort of the royal road to the unconscious, the way Freud thought dreams were the royal road to the unconscious, I think is a vast oversimplification of how the brain works. And I think the main thing is that because you're focusing intently, because you're suspending to some extent critical judgment and open to new ideas, you may be more open to influence by things that when you were being more judgmental, you would kind of argue with or keep out of awareness or not easily accept. But I think it's overly simplistic to say that it's just, the straight highway to the unconscious. I don't think that's what's going on.
Not only unconscious, because in this theory there is a subconscious mind. So
Right.
it's like if you can, during the hypnosis, insert a program like a software in the mind, and after that your brain or your mind works differently. So it's a unrealistic way to approach hypnosis for me.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I do think that hypnosis provides opportunities for us to approach old problems from new points of view and engage with those new points of using those new points of view. And it can be very powerful that way. If you, one of the things that hypnosis practitioners like to say is, it's a mistake to say to someone, don't think about purple elephants, because, what are you going to think about? So the way in which you design a hypnotic instruction has a lot to do with how effective it's likely to be. So are you just writing new software? I don't think so. I think the brain is too complex for that. But I do think that you can use new input in an altered mental state to help people take a new point of view about an old problem. And does that mean you're rewriting the way the entire system works? No, I think what you're doing is using the way the system works to more rapidly change perception and cognition and behavior.
Yeah, we can enhance our cognitive flexibility, right?
Yes, exactly right. That's a very good term for it. That's exactly right.
And clarifying this question, what is hypnosis' most common myth?
The most common myth, and the one that I think is most unfortunate, is that you lose control with hypnosis. And so, there's the stage hypnotist, dangling watches and all this stuff. And it looks that way because you get the football coach to dance like a ballerina and make a fool of himself and that kind of thing. And yet it is a very powerful way to enhance control. If you learn to take this altered mental state as a way of being more open to new ideas, cognitive flexibility, as you talk about, that's a tremendous opportunity to change. It's a tremendous psychotherapeutic opportunity as well. And so the idea, people are afraid of hypnosis because they think they're going to lose control. And, certainly we're all susceptible to influence by other people. We sometimes make mistakes. People mislead us. 2/3 of Republicans in the United States think Trump won the election. It's total nonsense. So people do that all the time without hypnosis. I think what it does is teach you about your ability to be cognitively flexible, to alter your perceptions, to alter the way you relate to your body. And that's an asset, not a liability. It's a way of teaching you to have more control over the way you manage your body and your thinking.
Okay, perfect. And could you explain a little bit more about how hypnosis evolved as a therapeutic practice since Mesmer?
Well, the interesting thing is that hypnosis is the oldest Western conception of a psychotherapy. It's the first time that a talking interaction was thought to have therapeutic potential. And despite that, it has repeatedly run into roadblocks. So there are people are afraid of being controlled mentally. Mesmer himself had a very successful practice in Vienna. He left and went to Paris and was competing very successfully against the French doctors of the day. They didn't like that. It's interesting that his offices were, in contrast to doctors' offices in Paris at the time, which were sort of dark and musty and unpleasant and cold. His was warm, and there were lots of patients around exchanging experiences and all this, and going into these, altered states around these paquets of metal filings. It was a cheerful place. It was a place where you set people up to feel that they could do something to feel better, and patients liked it. And so he was stealing business from other French physicians. And think about what the major treatment at the time in France was. It was bloodletting. So unless you happen to have congestive heart failure or polycythemia vera, you were more likely to be killed than helped by going to a French physician. I think it was Voltaire wrote to his brother, "We did everything we could to save father's life. We even sent the doctors away." And so he was investigated by a French panel of experts that included our own Benjamin Franklin, who was having a lot of fun in Paris at the time, the brilliant chemist Lavoisier, who was on the commission, who not only developed the principles of oxygen chemistry, but developed the notion of the gross national product that we're still using today. He was beheaded in the revolution 6 months after that panel was done. There was one other doctor on the panel, Dr. Guillotin, the inventor of the guillotine. He kind of created the mind-body problem. And they concluded that hypnosis was nothing but heated imagination. Now, I think that's not a bad definition, actually. I've heard worse. But that at the time was considered terrible criticism, because Mesmer thought there were actually changes in magnetic fields in patients' bodies induced by the magnet. He called them magnetists, the mesmeric contact. Now, why the patient's magnetic fields wouldn't destroy the fields in the therapist, I've never quite figured out. But obviously, that was not true. So they rejected animal magnetism, as it was called then. And that was kind of the end of Mesmer's career. It was a very damaging experience. And it took years, and people like Esdale and Braid to demonstrate, that you could go to India and use hypnosis to conduct terrible surgeries, amputations and things like that, with very little pain in many of the people that they work with. And
Doctor, sorry, do you know
yeah.
how Mesmer formulates this theory about animal magnetism? I was I've been reading some papers, and I don't know, maybe because he knows about the Paracelsus theory about these magnetic fields. I don't know, something about it. So I know Paracelsus use a how can I say, primitive use of hypnosis, like Avicenna, Iranian physician. And I'd like to know if you know why Mesmer formulated this theory of animal magnetism.
They're interesting reflections. I don't really know. I think he certainly was intrigued by the capacity of one human being to influence another. And so he would see inducing these, pseudo-epileptic like events. And, the brain is in fact influenced by magnetism. And we're now using transcranial magnetic stimulation to treat depression, suicidal ideation, obsessive compulsive disorder. We're doing research on that here.
And it enhances the capacity to go into the hypnotic state?
Yeah, we've got evidence now that we've applied TMS to the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. We enhance connectivity between that and the anterior cingulate, and we are seeing transient increases in hypnotizability. That's exactly right. So, it's not as crazy as it seemed, but it's not also just applying a magnet somewhere. But, the brain works through electric fields, and every time there's a flow of electric current, there's a magnetic field that surrounds it. And you can, so the electricity influences the magnetism, but the magnetism can influence the flow of electrical current in the brain. And so it isn't as crazy as it had seemed. And how he got to it, I'm not quite sure, but I think he was impressed by the fact that he could have influences on patients that seemed to go beyond just talking to them. And so that's the way he conceptualized the effect of hypnosis.
And after Mesmer, who are the main characters about hypnosis, about the use of hypnosis in the world?
Well, as I mentioned, Braid did some very important work in India. I know he was in England. Esdale went to India and helped with major surgeries, amputations, using hypnosis. And at the time that ether anesthesia was first introduced at Mass General Hospital, the surgeon strode to the front of the amphitheater and said, "Gentlemen, this is no humbug," meaning to contrast hypnosis with ether. And actually, Esdale had written a paper about the effects of hypnosis, mesmerism in India, and he withdrew it, saying, "Well, I only got 80% surgical anesthesia. They're getting 90% with ether. So, I kind of give up." Well, it's taken us more than 100 years to discover that, the brain does have something to do with pain control. The strain and pain lies mainly in the brain. And so the way you use your brain can influence how you interpret signals from the body and how much pain they cause you. And that's a kind of manipulation that can be very powerful. So there was that kind of rejection. Then there were people like Milton Erickson, who actually was sort of the, in the early part of the last century, was the main physician using hypnosis. And he had this idea that it was a sort of direct line to the unconscious, and that if you just shut off the conscious mind, you would let your unconscious solve your problems. And my own feeling about that is that if my unconscious knew how to solve a problem, it already would have done it. I don't think you need to shut off the conscious mind to take advantage of what else is going on in your brain. But he did create interest in and activity in the field of using hypnosis clinically that I think persisted and influenced people in Brazil and Europe and elsewhere around the world. And then there were scientists like Ernest Hilgard at Stanford, who did some major research on hypnotizability measurement, the Stanford Hypnotic Susceptibility Scale, and on the relationship between hypnotizability and pain control. He found about a 0.6 correlation between hypnotizability and the ability to control pain clinically with hypnosis. So there then began an era of serious research on the neurobiology of hypnosis, which is continuing now.
And what about Freud? Why Freud stopped to use hypnosis in his clinical practice? We forgot to mention him.
Yes, well, Freud, he went to study with the great French neurologist and psychiatrist Jean-Martin Charcot, and he was a student, and Charcot agreed to include him in his class if Freud would help to translate some of Charcot's writings from French to German, which he did. And he got very interested. He was interested, obviously, in the unconscious, and initially thought this would be a way to control the unconscious. And with Breuer, in the first book, Studies in Hysteria, they were talking about using hypnosis to trace conscious symptoms or experience symptoms to unconscious recollections of often sexual or physical abuse. And of course, that did not make him popular with the parents of some of his patients, who were then stood accused of abusing their children. And sadly, that does happen. But Freud wrote in his autobiography, I had an experience in which a patient who I was relieving of her attacks of pain by tracing them back to their traumatic origins suddenly opened her eyes, woke out of the trance, and threw her arms around my neck. He said, I was modest enough not to attribute this event to my own irresistible personal attractiveness. And he said, we were interrupted by the unexpected entrance of a manservant. But he said, I realized that it was not an actual attraction to me, but a transference of feelings that she had for her father. And so he said, in order to eliminate or at least control these events, I had to change my method. So the reason there's a couch in psychoanalysis is because Freud was using it to induce hypnosis. He didn't like patients staring him in the eye, so he moved the chair around to the head of the couch so the patient couldn't see him, he could see the patient, and started doing free association and psychoanalysis. So that's where it all began. But he, in some ways, I think was a little frightened of it. It was too strong, too powerful. And so he needed to tame things down a little. So Freud gave up the use of hypnosis, and it's why most psychoanalysts say, if Freud gave it up, who am I to use it? And so it was, and in fact, that my father had a supervisor, Frieda from Reichmann, a very famous interpersonal psychoanalyst, who he went to her and said, I was advised by Margaret Brenman, who was an analyst who did use hypnosis, to stop using it because it would ruin my reputation as an analyst. And Frieda got angry with him and said, why are you feeling so precious about your reputation? I want you to teach a course in hypnosis at the White Institute where he was training, and you're going to teach it because I'm going to be there as a student. I'm going to learn from you about it. And so that's what kept him doing it. But there was real resistance, and there still is in the psychoanalytic community, to using hypnosis.
And I heard some theories too that Freud wasn't a good hypnotist. I don't know if he had a good voice or something like that, and I don't know why.
Well,
The fact that he stopped to use hypnosis, that's the fact. In the, I think probably in the beginning of the psychoanalysis theory.
well, Freud liked to listen, and he was a very good listener, a very astute listener, and his ability to interpret and write about, Freud won. One of the things he was proudest about in his life is he won the Goethe Prize for writing. And he was one of the things he was most proud about. And his writing is brilliant. I mean, his books are like detective novels. If this is happening, how can we explain this? And he leads you down this path. It's wonderful reading. It really is. I when I was a medical student, I thought I'd like to spend some time in London. So I arranged for a 6-week rotation at the Maudsley Hospital in London. And while I was there, I knew that Anna Freud was still seeing patients in London. And so I wrote her a note and just said, I'm this medical student, could I come see you? And much to my amazement, I got a handwritten note from her giving me an appointment the next week. And I went there. And I have never felt as connected with a stranger as I did with her. She had these bright blue eyes. She looked right at you. And she asked me about my family. And I said, well, both my parents were psychiatrists and psychoanalysts. And they told me I was free to be any kind of psychiatrist I wanted to be. And she said, so are you going to be analyzed? And I was sort of hemming and hawing. I didn't think I was going to become an analyst. And so I was trying to be polite about it. And she said, so you're not going to be a psychoanalyst? And I said, no. And she said, well, being the child of a psychoanalyst, psychoanalysis is in a way a liberation from your parents. And that's hard to do if your parents are psychoanalysts, as she knew all too well, because her father was her analyst. And she said, what is it you don't like about being an analyst? I mean, there was no bullshit with her, and I said, well, I find this sort of passive position of just listening all the time and every once in a while making an interpretation. It makes me feel like I'm not doing enough to help my patients. And I'm not comfortable with it. And she said, there's one thing you have to understand. She said, when my father started doing psychoanalysis, it was considered a waste of time for a doctor to listen to a patient. Patients were there to listen to doctors and be told what to do. And she said, so when he was quiet and listened, it conveyed profound respect. And I have to say that I was really chastened by that. I thought, good point. I hadn't thought of it that way at all. So I think in the historical context of where medicine and psychiatry were at that time, what he was doing was a more active intervention than I conceived of it as. But nonetheless, I'm not an analyst and I'm doing hypnosis. So I decided there are other ways to be helpful besides being quiet and listening. But I think that's one reason Freud just liked and was good at listening and kind of weaving pieces of the story together. And so that's what he did best. And I think he, in some ways, must have felt that he was sort of contaminating the material if he talked too much.
When is regression with hypnosis recommended, and why?
Well, I think the uses of what are called regressive techniques are more associated with dealing with things like trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder. If you think about it, a flashback to a traumatic event is a kind of dissociative regression. You're going back and not just remembering, but reliving the event that occurred. And so I think that is the kind of problem that is so much driven by past traumatic experience, that a hypnotic technique that gets you to go back under controlled conditions and relive an event is something that can be helpful. I'll give you an example. A woman came to see me. She was a social worker who had suffered an attempted rape as she was coming home from the store at the end of the day. And it was just getting dark, and she struggled with the assailant. He was trying to drag her upstairs to her apartment. She suffered a basilar skull fracture as a result, and she felt terribly guilty that she had gotten herself so badly hurt. The police weren't too interested because she hadn't actually been raped, and they didn't realize that she'd been that badly injured. But she wanted to use hypnosis initially just to see if she could get a better visual image of the guy's face because it
Is
was
it
getting dark.
possible with hypnosis to remember things that you can remember consciously? I
Oh,
mean,
yes, it is.
you're
Yeah,
conscious using hypnosis, but in this
yeah,
different state, you can
yeah.
remember things better.
Well, there are times when the affective arousal of a traumatic event can be such that you really avoid it. That just the thought. That's one of the big symptoms, avoidance in PTSD, is a way of protecting yourself psychologically from the emotional arousal that comes with confronting the actual image of your assailant, for example. But there's a famous case with a bus driver in the Chowchilla, California. His bus, a car overtook the bus, took 23 children and the bus driver captive, and buried them in a van underground, and started ransom negotiations with the police. And they finally found them and released them. But he couldn't remember much about the assailants, and in particular the car. So he was hypnotized, and he remembered all of the numbers and letters of the license plate of the car that had overtaken them. He got the order wrong, but he remembered them all. And that was enough to lead to the arrest and conviction of the captors. So there are situations where you can feel kind of comforted and safe enough to allow yourself to remember more about what happened. Now, it's also possible to contaminate memory with hypnosis. It's possible without hypnosis.
Yeah, false memories too, right?
Yeah, that it's possible, but that's possible anyway. We know that leading interrogations can lead people to confess to things they didn't do. So yes, the memory is fallible and it can be contaminated with or without hypnosis. But on the other hand, it can be productive and helpful. So I asked this social worker to try and picture the guy's face, and she said, I can't see much of the details of the face, but what I do see is he doesn't want to just rape me. If he gets me up to my apartment, he's going to kill me. And so she realized that it was actually worse than she thought it was. And you think, well, that will make her worse. But I asked her to keep her body floating and comfortable. Your body is safe, even if you're remembering things that are very threatening. And I said, on the other side of this imaginary screen, I want you to picture one thing you did to protect yourself. And she said, he's surprised that I'm fighting that hard. He didn't think I would. So she realized on the one hand that she was in even more danger than she realized, but on the other hand, that she probably saved her life, and that getting that badly injured was a whole lot better than letting him get her upstairs. So you can help people using a kind of regressive technique like that to restructure their memories and their experiences of traumatic events, and that can be very helpful.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Spiegel, could you define what is AB reaction and describe how it can be addressed therapeutically?
Abreactions.
Yeah,
Well,
AB reaction.
they're basically just very strong emotional responses to traumatic experiences and or other experiences. They're going back, and suddenly, I remember a woman saying that she suddenly pictures an image of her husband falling off a donkey he was riding and being killed. And you're not just remembering, you're reliving the event. So with all the uncertainty about what's going to happen at the end. And, in general, we often over suppress emotional reactions. Those are situations where you under suppress them, where they just kind of explode and you experience things in very intense ways that can be frightening or threatening. Now, they don't happen that often, but they happen. I've never seen one that we couldn't quickly help people with and manage. And so they're intense, but they're controllable, and they don't happen spontaneously very often. And when they happen under controlled conditions, they can sometimes be therapeutically very useful.
Okay, but it's not a goal of the therapy put the people in this state of abreaction, right?
No, it's not a goal. It's sometimes a means to an end. It can sometimes help people put emotionally very stressful events into perspective. And the real, I sometimes wonder, why doesn't PTSD cure itself? Because many of the treatments are exposure based with abreaction and things like that. But I think the difference is that if it just happens to you, you feel like you're being re-traumatized all over again.
Yeah.
Because the essence of trauma is being made into an object, a thing. If if you are once again kind of re-attacked by a traumatic memory and all the emotions that come with it, you feel like the trauma is happening all over again.
Mhm.
If you approach it in a controlled way, where you say, we can turn it on, we can make sure you feel that your body is safe and comfortable, we can stop whenever you want, you're teaching them how to experience the trauma without the accompanying sense of complete helplessness. Because trauma is being made into an object, a thing. You don't control what's happening to your body, and that's terrifying. So if you can process it in a way that gives you an incremental sense of control over the memories, that is a therapeutic process.
Okay. Another thing that happens a lot here in Brazil is the use of NLP with hypnosis. I don't know if it happens there in US, and I'd like to know, Dr. David, what do you think about NLP and this use of NLP techniques and hypnosis?
Well, Bandler and Grinder, who sort of came up with NLP, were students of Erickson's. And, Milton's idea was that you sort of, put the conscious mind to sleep and, do things to the unconscious mind. And they kind of extended that by saying, well, look at how people look, and are their eyes going to the left or the right? And you can figure out what kind of personality they are, and you can kind of reprogram them. And what I don't like about that is that A, there isn't a whole lot of empirical evidence that it's helpful, but B, it's manipulative. It's just saying, I'm going to treat you like a broken car. You may not know how a car runs, but I'll replace the muffler and do other things and you'll be fixed. And there's something kind of disrespectful and dehumanizing about saying you're just going to reprogram people and figure out how to manipulate them and do it. And so to be honest with you, I just don't have a whole lot of use for NLP, and I think it gives people this sort of grandiose feeling that they can figure out how to manipulate and control people, rather than working with them as partners to help them deal with the suffering and problems that they have and teach them how to deal with it better, which is, to me, a much more therapeutic approach to helping people.
Okay. And Dr. Spiegel, why hypnosis, despite being a powerful tool, it's so underestimated by physicians and psychologists and health professionals in general?
Uh, I wish I knew. People either undervalue it, they say it's nonsense or stage show trickery, or they overvalue it and they say I can manipulate people and do things. But the joke is, so they either say it's useless or dangerous, and I understand people's concerns about the sort of stage show thing, but that we could say the same thing about drugs. There's snake oil salesmen too. There are a lot of drugs that get sold where we either overestimate their value or underestimate their danger. There are at least 50,000 opioid related deaths each year in the United States. More than 100,000 drug overdose deaths. Most of them are not suicides. They're inadvertent because the drug is just too strong and you just stop breathing at night. And so I can assure you that there's never been 50,000 people killed anywhere over any period of time with hypnosis. It's just a whole hell of a lot safer.
Yeah.
And so I don't get it. I understand it seems a little strange, and there are reasons for some kinds of fears and concerns. But I think we've just gotten a bad rap. I think it's something that can be, it's not useful for everyone, but it's useful for a whole lot of people. And it's a source of eternal frustration for me. And it's why I developed Reveri. It's why I thought, to hell with this, excessive fear about hypnosis. I've learned things in dealing with some 7,000 people in my career that I think can be more widely disseminated. So we built this app that has now 6 major programs on pain relief, on smoking control, dealing with anxiety and stress, finding focus, eating better, sleeping better, and we're helping 1,000 people a day now learn how to better deal with these problems. We've enrolled more than 100,000 people since Reveri has started, and I just thought I want to find a way to share the wealth, to help people benefit from this technique, which can be tremendously helpful. And one of the very cool things about it is that you'll know right away. You know, if you're doing cognitive behavioral therapy, you have to kind of trust that if you keep doing the exercises, your depression or your obsessions will get better. And they often do. It's a good treatment. With hypnosis, you'll know in 15 minutes whether your pain is better, your stress levels are better, you feel sleepier, you know, you can approach eating differently. So the nice thing is that you get this immediate feedback about whether it's likely to help you. And you know, there's some people that can't believe it, but we have evidence of thousands of people who report that they feel better after just a few minutes of learning to do self-hypnosis. So I just thought that at this point in my life, I want a legacy of using what I've learned and what we've learned in the field, and the kind of work that you're doing, Taigo, as well, to help to disseminate the ability to use it, whether or not people have prejudices about hypnosis. So be it. They've got prejudice, but try it. And we're using the electronic world now to make it available to them to try.
There is a hypnosis course there in US in universities or not?
There are, yes, there are. In, you know, it's interesting. It's taught in the best medical schools, but not in most medical schools. So, you know, Harvard, Columbia, Stanford, we have hypnosis courses, but they're electives. They're not required courses.
Okay.
There are then hypnosis societies. The Society for Clinical and Experimental Hypnosis, the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis have courses for professionals. Division 30 of the American Psychological Association has training programs. So they are available, but they're kind of, again, on the side. You know, they're not mainstream. And I wish that, you know, I understand, you know, I don't do surgery. I do psychiatry and psychotherapy. I don't expect surgeons to do a whole lot of hypnosis, but we just finished a study that was just accepted for publication showing that if you teach people about to have total knee replacements, hypnosis, you help them control their pain, and they use far less opioids than the ones who don't get that opportunity. We, you know, if you could just move a bit of it, move some of the hypnotic language into the way that we practice, I think we could improve our care enormously. So I think it's something that every doctor ought to know something about.
Yeah.
And just think about how they say, instead of saying, "How's your pain today?" say, "How comfortable are you feeling today?" You know, you just shift the emphasis on recovery, right? I have this wonderful young internist who's working with orthopedic surgeons, Jesse Markovitz, who conducted the study and is moving hypnosis into the medical mainstream. And she wrote a paper called "Hypnosis: The Best Treatment You've Never Used," you know, in the American Journal of Medicine. So I'm hoping that we can infiltrate mainstream medicine as well. But I also want to go right to the patients because they can learn to use it for themselves.
So what is hypnotizability, and what makes one person more hypnotizable than another?
Well, hypnotizability is just the capacity to respond to a series of hypnotic instructions, and people reliably vary on that. So if I tell you your hand will feel light and buoyant, it'll float up in the air like a balloon, for some people, they say, "I don't know what you're talking about." For other people, their hand starts to float up and you pull it down and it wants to go back up. So you're inducing a dissociative experience and an alteration in the sense of control over motor function. You can experience dissociation, you feel sensory alterations. And some people as adults just have that ability and some don't. And it varies on a distribution. So about 2/3 of the adult population is at least somewhat hypnotizable. About 10 to 15% are extremely hypnotizable. And a quarter to a third just aren't. And that's okay. They do something else. They tend to be sort of less intuitive, more logically structured people cognitively. And the interesting thing is that hypnotizability in adult life is as reliable as IQ. You know, your score will be the same if you retested 25 years later. Most children are highly hypnotizable. You know, you call your child in for dinner and they're out playing and they don't hear you. They're just doing what they're doing, you know. Work and play are all the same thing for kids, you know. But some of us lose that ability as we mature and, you know, by the early 20s, have more what Piaget called formal operations, where you think first and then feel later. But highly hypnotizable people tend to retain that ability, and it's a measurable trait. And so I start every clinical encounter measuring people's hypnotizability and use that to guide what I do with them. If they're not at all hypnotizable, I'll talk about the kind of cognitive structure of what I was going to do and say, just think about your body as a child that depends on you. So why would you put poison in its lungs? Or we'll do progressive muscle relaxation or something else, or I'll prescribe meds. So on the other hand, if they are hypnotizable, I make use of that hypnotizability.
Okay, this is should be my next question to you. Well, what is the importance of knowing a person's hypnotizability profile for a therapeutic approach? And if you person, what is the difference of the approach of to treat a Apollonian patients than a Dionysian patient?
So the idea is basically that highly hypnotizable patients are more Dionysian. They just are intuitive. They don't worry about, so their everyday experience is more hypnotic-like. And there's evidence from studies of Auke Tellegen at the University of Minnesota that people who are more highly hypnotizable have higher scores on a measure he calls absorption. So they go into hypnotic-like states all the time anyway, just looking at a sunset or watching a movie. Yeah. So they use the hypnotic-like mode every day anyway. So just take advantage of that and say, I'm going to help you restructure your experience. Let's try this. And you can filter the hurt out of the pain. You know, I had one woman who was quite hypnotizable, pregnant, had disc disease in her back. As the baby got bigger, the pain got worse. They couldn't use drugs, so they tried nerve stimulator implanting, didn't work. And within a few minutes of hypnosis, I said, you're floating in a bath, lake, or hot tub, filter the hurt out of the pain. Your body is light and floating. And she opened her eyes and she said, why were you the last doctor I was sent to instead of the first? So people like her can just quickly learn to use these states. On the other hand, the Apollonians are less hypnotizable. They want a reason for everything. And I've had patients arguing with me about, did I construct the measure of hypnotizability just to prove something to them? And I, you know, I'd have to wait to the second session to measure it, you know, but instead you say, okay, you're the more logical type. So let's approach things in a logical way. And I had two women who were very different, who both had trichotillomania, hair pulling. And the high hypnotizable was an attractive woman who had a hairdresser. She had beautiful hair, and the hairdresser said, I'll do your hair for free if you let me take photos and put them on the wall of the salon. But he started coming on to her, and she didn't want to be sexually involved with him, but couldn't say no. And highs often have trouble saying no to people. So she started pulling at her hair, and she damaged her hair enough that relationship was over because he couldn't take pictures of her hair. So she loved taking care of stray animals, injured animals. She'd stop her car on the side of a road and help an animal. I said, would you do to an animal what you're doing to your own head? So instead of pulling your hair, I want you to stroke it. And I also want you to have nothing to do with this guy, but just stroke your hair. And so just like that, she stopped. I had another patient who said, I pull at my hair to get at my knotty nerves. And she was, like a 3 on the HIP, wasn't hypnotizable at all. So I told her to think about how she was treating her body and the physical harm she was, imposing on it, and to find some other way to deal with her naughty nerves. And we talked about kind of not catastrophizing and desensitizing her concerns about the things that worry her and putting them into perspective. And she came back with a graph of pre-treatment hair pulling. And at first it got worse, and then gradually it got better. So with people like that, with Apollonians, you've got to be much more interactive and logical with them about how you approach their problem. Whereas with highs, you just say, I'm going to show you what to do. Now go do it. And they often will.
Okay. And you told me that your goal is the Reveri app is spread how can I say the message of the hypnosis as a therapeutic approach to the world.
Right. Right.
And what is the Reveri main application?
It's very useful for stress management, and God knows we're all stressed. Teaching people how to, if they can't control the things that are stressing them, they can at least control how their body reacts to them. So when you're feeling tense, your heart rate, blood pressure go up, you start to sweat, you notice that, and then you feel even worse. You think, oh God, this is really bad. And then your body reacts to that. And so it's like a snowball rolling downhill. If you start by controlling your body, which you can do well in hypnosis, you can then face the problems you're dealing with and think about them more clearly and figure out a way to at least address the stress. It's the same kind of mind-body interaction as a problem when people have trouble falling asleep or if they wake up in the middle of the night. Hypnosis is very helpful in helping people get to sleep. That's our most popular use. Our most popular app at Reveri is the insomnia app. And I have people who've written, I wasn't sleeping right for 15 years and now I am, thank you. So it can be very helpful for that, for focus, for just enhancing your ability to focus on a problem, to prepare in advance for what you want to do or learn, do it, and then review it in hypnosis. You use the natural focus of hypnosis to increase your concentration ability. Pain control, very helpful for pain control. Filter the hurt out of the pain. People can literally change how much pain they feel. And we've shown this with EEG studies, that you can alter the brain's reaction to a painful stimulus just by altering hypnotically your perception of what's going on. So you can literally feel less pain.
And how do you use the hypnosis for chronic pain? Because when you put the person into the hypnotic state, you can suggest that they are filtering the pain in your body. But after that, how they can manage the chronic pain?
You teach them to do self-hypnosis at any time. So I've worked with women with metastatic breast cancer, and they'll get a new pain in their chest and they think, oh my God, the cancer is spreading. They feel anxious, it hurts like hell. And I teach them to go into a state of self-hypnosis and imagine you're in a warm bath or a hot tub, filter the hurt out of the pain, and they use it as a tool. So, and I've had patients say it's better than taking a pill, because I don't get the side effects. I don't get constipated. I don't get cloudy, but they use it that way. So when they need it, instead of taking a pill, they do their self-hypnosis. And we found in randomized controlled studies that we get a 50% reduction in pain on the same medications in women randomized to learn self-hypnosis compared to those in the usual care condition. So it's a tool that people can use. And now with Reveri, they can hear my voice reinforcing their ability to control the pain. So it can be very useful for chronic as well as acute pain.
Yeah, better than medicines and with no side effects.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
And what about hypnosis, the application of hypnosis to eat well that you mentioned before?
Yes. So what we find is that we can teach people to eat with respect for their body, that you can actually eat less and enjoy eating more. And think about the way you feed your body, the way you fed your baby or your child, or you feed your pet. You wouldn't force more food into a child than it wanted or needed. Your body is totally dependent on you. So eat with respect for your body and eat like a gourmet. Most gourmets are normal or underweight. Because every encounter with food is so elaborate, the flavor, the texture, the temperature, the aroma, that they fill themselves with the experience of eating, and they can enjoy eating more, even while they're eating less. And so I had dinner the other night with a friend who started using Reveri about 6 months ago. He put on a lot of weight. He looked pregnant, but he wasn't, kind of thing. And he said, I find, I was eating dinner looking at my smartphone, and I didn't even notice what I was eating. So I said, don't put the phone away. Make eating your full experience and encounter, and enjoy the flavor. And he's French. He understands the value of well-prepared food. And he's lost 20 kilos
that's a lot.
In about 6 months. He's now walking 15 miles a day. He walks to work, and that's in a different town. To meet us for dinner, he walked from one end of Palo Alto to the other. And he's kept the weight off. He's eating well, carefully. And so you can change your perspective on what you do. It can be very helpful.
Yeah, Reveri has been helped me a lot, because I love chocolate, and especially at night. Around 8 at night, I have this trigger in my mind to eat chocolate, and then I put your protocol script, how can I say, at Reveri, and it works really well for me, because you as you said, you can understand that is a trigger, and your reaction to this trigger is different when you listen to this script that you.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah, that's really nice.
That's great.
I could stop my craving for chocolate.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. You distinguish the craving from the need to act on it. We sort of get hypnotized by our cravings, right? And instead you take control of that. So yes, sure, there's chocolate there, but there comes a point where you don't even notice how much of it you're eating. You're just, eating it. And you don't, just because you have the thought doesn't mean you have to act on the thought.
Yeah.
And you can have other thoughts, like, is this good for my body? How am I going to feel in the morning, after I've done this? And so I can enjoy a certain amount of something that's pleasurable to eat, but more of it doesn't help. And I now have to think about what I'm doing to my body when I do it. And so I'm so glad that's helping you deal with the cravings.
Yeah. And how Reveri can help people who want to stop smoking?
The same thing. It's the same principle that I tell people 3 things to say to themselves in hypnosis. 3 things. For my body, smoking's a poison. I need my body to live. I owe my body respect and protection. And so you don't fight smoking. The more you tell yourself don't smoke, the more you're going to want to smoke. Instead, you think, what am I doing to my body? And would I do this to a child? Would I do it to my pet? Would I force smoke into their lungs? No, I wouldn't do it. So you can feel good about yourself the minute you make the commitment to protect your body from the poison of cigarette smoke. So you're focusing on what you're for. You're not depriving yourself of something. You're taking a position of respect and protection for your own body. And what's important about that is many people think, well, I can always stop and all that. And you can always stop if you do, but it may be too late for your body. So you may feel better. Oh, I finally stopped smoking, but by now you've got emphysema or lung cancer. And so you've got to think about, I'm not doing this to myself, I'm doing it to my body. And would I do that to any other trusting, innocent creature that depended on me for existence? And when you think of it that way, you realize that it's not a game, it's serious. And there will come a point where it doesn't really matter whether you smoke or not. I had a patient who said, when I really got scared was when my doctor stopped telling me to stop smoking. That, it was too late. My body was too damaged by it. So you focus on what you're for, and think of your body as a trusting, innocent creature, and recognize what you're doing to your body, not just what you're doing to yourself.
And have you been using this approach with another kind of addiction, like with alcohol or something like that?
I haven't studied it as systematically and haven't done as much of it, but I've used it for people with alcohol abuse, for example. And I've had some people actually do surprisingly well. That, say something like, "Oh, you mean sort of like the body is the temple of the soul kind of thing?" And I said, "Yeah, that's right. And you're damaging the temple, And I've had some people get a handle on drinking, not everyone by any means, but some. So yes, the same principle can be involved, that you look at just what you're doing to your body when you fill it full of alcohol all the time.
And how we can find the Reveri?
Reveri, you can go to the App Store. At the moment, we only have an iOS version. You can go to the App Store and download Reveri, Reveri.
And it's available only in English now, right?
At the moment, only in English, but we're hoping to put it out in other languages as well.
In Portuguese for the Brazilians.
Yes. Okay. Well, I'll get back to you. You may be able to help us with that, Taigo, because you've got the hypnosis experience and you're fluent in Portuguese. So that would be a good connection, and maybe we'll do that.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be very glad to help. In my practice, hypnotizing actors and actresses, I found that are quite hypnotizable, more hypnotizable than the regular person. What do you think about this in your clinical practice? Is this correct?
I think it is, absolutely. I think, hypnosis is controlled dissociation. And when you're a good actor, the method in acting, you don't just remember the lines, but you try to inhabit the personality. You try to become that other person. And there are many people, and that's very engaging as in the audience, because you're not just watching a person trying to be someone else. You're watching someone who is being that person, who brings all the emotion and feeling that comes with the situation that the person they're acting is in. And so I think in general, good actors are highly hypnotizable people. And often you'll compliment them and say, "God, you were terrific." And they look a little puzzled. They say, I sometimes they have some amnesia for what happened when they did it.
Yeah.
And they're a little surprised, because if they're, and I've seen the same with musicians.
Yeah.
I talked to a wonderful concert pianist, and I said, "What are you doing when you're actually playing?" He said, "I'm floating above the piano, thinking about the emotion that I want to infuse into the music." He said, "If I'm actually thinking about what my fingers are doing, I'm screwing it up. It's terrible." So, so you want to be so well trained in the technique that you can focus on just the feeling and the emotion you want to convey, and your hands are doing what they know how to do. So it's that same kind of, that we're built that way. It's the same kind of dissociative experience that allows you to just inhabit some other person's life for a while and be that person.
Yeah, when I was doing this research, one of the approach was how hypnosis could be effective when you build the character, when you was constructing the character in your mind. Mm-hmm. And I put these actresses in the hypnotic state, and they act like the character and not like themselves. And it was a little bit weird. And after that, I think 70% didn't remember what they did during the hypnotic state. So when I suggest them to remember, they remember what happened. So that's how was an interesting data that I that I got.
That's very. And I believe it.
And I thank you a lot again for your papers and for your time to help me during this research.
You're welcome. You're welcome, Tiger. Well, I admire what you're doing, and keep it up. And I hope we can get Reveri more popular, and hopefully do it in Portuguese too. And we'll be back in touch with you when we get to where we can do that. That'd be great.
Okay,
so Dr. Keep up the good work.